Hey guys, welcome back to As a Man Thinketh. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about something that some of you probably don't pay that much attention to, but is actually a very big topic, especially out west, and that is water rights. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about is how large corporations are buying up farmland to divert water rights into cities. They're literally stealing the water rights from agricultural users. Maybe stealing is an incorrect term. They're manipulating the system. But first I wanted to talk about a letter I got from Bracken Operating LLC in Texas. It's a small oil company. And I think that this letter is a good way of helping you understand some of the controversy that's going on with water rights right now. In the letter he said, you mentioned your opinion that large dairies don't care about small operators. I'm afraid I do not share that opinion at all. I'm confident that large dairy operators, like all large businesses, always have a strong interest in elimination of any competition. I'd like to point out a couple of examples. In 2010, two lifelong career liberal Poles got together to create the Dodd Frank Act. This bill was presented as a strong rebuke to large banks that required federal bailouts because they were too big to fail and needed help due to the problems of their own making. As it turned out, Dodd and Frank turned to the very same banks that caused the problems for advice as to what should be in the bill. At the end of the day, a layer of regulation was added that makes your business loans more expensive. So I think that this is an important topic. I've brought up the Dodd Frank bill in numerous occasions on this channel. In fact, I've said that it was the largest private property grab in history. And by that, what happened was it changed a lot of lending practices, which made it virtually impossible for small operators to continue operating. I worked in the commercial real estate industry between 2005 and about 2016 or so. And then I continued in real estate for a little while after that. But one of the things that happened in that industry was that people literally could not refinance. You have seven-year term loans on commercial properties. They couldn't refinance that debt after 7 years because of the Dodd Frank bill. And so you saw this wave of commercial property bankruptcies that were coming from independent owners. And now what you see is that a lot of these commercial properties are owned by industrial institutions. And they got them for pennies on the dollar because they were buying them out of bankruptcies. It was an enormous land grab, in my opinion. The Dodd Frank bill changed our society for the worse. It made it much harder for small businesses to operate. And I agree 100% with what he was saying in that letter. However, what I disagree with is that the operator, the large dairy operator, and we can agree to disagree on this because we definitely agree on the Dodd Frank bill, but the large scale operator cares, he cares about his land, he cares about his dairy. But when you get into the industrial complex of agriculture, the ones who are passing bills and making everybody's lives difficult, the ones who are shutting down the small farmers, it's not them, but it is the kind of, if you move up that chain a little bit, there are just a few massive food producers in the United States. And as I get into water, think about this, right? We just had PFAS chemicals come out and from the EPA, and over 600 municipalities fail the EPA's forever chemical tests. What do you think that's going to do to the prices of bottled water? Because everybody's afraid to drink it, right? It's harmful to us. When you look at who these big institutions are, and you look at how deep their hands actually go into things like politics and policies, they're the ones that are doing it. I worked for a little bit of time with a chicken house producer. As a real estate agent, I was trying to help him sell his farm so he could retire. We had interested buyers, capable buyers, people who had plenty of funding, plenty of experience within the industry. But there was one problem with this particular farm. It had needed to have some upgrades, but it was allowed to continue to operate under its contract with a much larger meat producer. We all know how this system works. And he was able to continue to operate because half of his profits were going to one of the executives. And for that reason, every buyer that came in was given a list of upgrades that went above and beyond anything that was required, in my opinion. That's how those industries work. They're not good for the farmer. And a lot of farmers, I know of a dairy farmer who supplies organic milk to a large organic milk brand right now, who's trying to gravitate away from having to sell to big dairy. And what he wants to do is sell direct to consumer. But a lot of that is at stake right now as well, because of, you know, the way that they can sell raw milk is as pet milk. And because of the current avian flu in cattle, they're basically coming down with a lot of restrictions on raw milk, including selling it as pet milk, because heaven forbid there could be avian flu in it. But my point is that no, I don't think that a lot of these big scale farmers, I'm sure some of them are, yeah, but a lot of them are kind of stuck in a system. And if they could have a better way around it, they would. I hear that a lot from farmers, is that I wish I took as much or paid as much attention in school to marketing as I did to agriculture, because the biggest problem I have is not being able to market my own products directly to the consumer. I have to go through these elevators. I have to go through these directions. And that is a system that people are awakening to, and I think it's going to change over the course of time. And that is the big threat, okay? Because that's the big threat to the big corporations that are buying up all the grains, buying up all the milk, buying up all these things. They can't allow farmers to directly market to consumers, because that would ultimately harm their business model. So what do? They continue to push legislation and things that make it harder to sell directly to the consumer. I've often warned that when you regulate the big guys, you're basically giving them a bone and you're making it harder for the smaller guys. So let's get into water rights and why all this comes in there. A lot of people, and I think that, you know, actually it might have been Bracken here. I like what he says here. I hope you can help spread the word that actually small capitalists and many anti-capitalism activists have much in common. Actually, many of us hate big government and big business. Hate's a pretty strong word, but I find it interesting that we still consider the structure that we see today with big business and government to be capitalism at all. Because in my perspective, that's not what I would define as capitalism. I'm a pro-capitalist, but I am pro-free market capitalism. I think the more that we allow our government to interfere with our business operations, the more we allow our government to tell you as a consumer who you can buy from and who you cannot buy from, the bigger of a mess we make. And in reality, capitalism is the best path to prosperity for every nation that has ever used it. Any nation who has moved in the direction of socialism or any of these other crazy ideas has ultimately failed. It has completely screwed up their economy. They become communists. So capitalism is a very, very good thing. But what happens in late stage capitalism, and it can be averted if we're aware of it, but what happens in late stage capitalism is you start to see this shift towards what I would label as corporate fascism, where corporations have so much influence over the government that they're able to influence and control the regulations into their favor, where the consumer wouldn't naturally gravitate to profiting those companies. They're able to force that profiteering. And that is the stage of the United States that we're in now. And it's a very, very dangerous stage, because the next phase of that stage, which is essentially moving into socialism, which is moving towards communism. And you guys could disagree with me on that all you want to, but that's where I think, you know, there's a difference between the small capitalists, the free market capitalists, and the anti-capitalists. But where we do share something in common is that neither one of us like the way that the system is currently rigged. And that's what we need to, I mean, that's, you know, if you need to find something in common with somebody else, that's a way of finding, you know, some common ground. But people have to understand that what we're actually seeing, what it is that they're against, is not actually a form of capitalism, but it is a transitionary step. And the problem is that a lot of people buy into that transition and think, oh, well, you know, we need to support these people that want to move us towards stakeholder capitalism, right? No, that is a bad move. That is what they want you to do. If you think these companies aren't profiteering off of this, you're wrong. So let's get into water. I've said I was going to get there several times. Another subscriber of our channel sent me an article, and it was one that was already on my watch list. And that was an article that came out in The Guardian. This came from Jeff. I'm not going to mention the last name. But it is, the title of the article is "Water is More Valuable than Oil." And it talks about a corporation called Greenstone that has basically been buying up hundreds of acres of farmland under a farm LLC, and it's an investment, okay? And we see this all the time. We see there are lots of farm LLC land investment companies out there. You don't even realize how many are out there. And what they'll do is they'll buy up the farmland and then they'll lease it back to farmers who can't afford the farmland. And I think that this is going to be a much bigger deal in the next 10 years than most of you think. And so it's important to understand where this money is actually going and what this land is actually being used for, because it is, the long-term intent is not for agriculture. Well, I lost a piece of paper there. Okay, so they're buying up the farmland and they're leasing it back to the farmers who can't afford the farmland but need to be able to grow and expand their business because they've got to make very tight margins meet. If you looked at the Minnesota, the recent numbers out of Minnesota of the profit margins of farmers are actually very small. A farmer selling $250,000 gross was averaging about $40,000 in net. I mean, that's pretty low. A lot of people think farmers are rich. They're not rich people at all. They are in a capitalist system that requires them to farm a ton for a very small margin. And that's part of what I think is wrong with it. People are not willing to pay what their food is actually worth, and corporate America doesn't want them to. They want them to spend their money on other things. So what this company has done, Greenstone, has bought up a bunch of land under GFC Farms LLC or something like that. And they hold it for about 10 years. And then one day, suddenly, they sell the water rights that come with that land because it's along the Colorado River Basin. It's in Cibola. And they sell those water rights to a developer 200 miles away who then gets the water to go into a new subdivision. So all that water is now being directed to the subdivision. In a world of free market capitalism, in a world where, you know, we talk about government regulation, there are a couple problems with this. Number one, the water rights in and of themselves were available to be for sale to an exterior location because of the regulations. The regulations allow them to buy the land, buy the water rights that come with the land, sell the water rights separately, and they're allowed to sell it to an external location. It doesn't matter how far that might be. And they did that because cities and governments need that water as well. And so they're buying up water rights and diverting it. The issue that I see with this environmentally is that when you look at a lot of this farmland, a lot of the farmland that you see along the Colorado River is in old floodplains of the river. And that's because, you know, when there was overflows on the river, it would flood out and it would soak into the ground, and it made good fertile soil for farming. So by diverting, when you use that water for an agricultural purpose, it is getting back down into the soil. And I think that there's a lot of misinformation around agriculture and water use. And a lot of that misinformation gets a lot of activists all heated up to help push forward a lot of these regulations to regulate more and more of the water rights to allow somebody to buy the water rights and divert it to a suburb. It's always a catch-22 with these people. They never realize how far this stuff actually goes. For those who are activists, it's a great thing. That farmland will now be reclaimed into the wild because you can't grow anything on it. It completely dried up because it has no water going to it anymore because they've completely sold off the water rights. The farmers who were releasing the land just had to downsize their operations and make less money because they could no longer farm that land. Nobody can farm it without water. But as I said, the actual natural hydrology of the area would have had flooding every now and then. It would have had water running through those soils on a regular basis. And because we pump so much water out of the Colorado River and we divert it to so many places, cities, I mean, this particular company has brokered deals where it has diverted water to Facebook. It's a pretty big deal. They made millions on this deal. They bought the land with the water rights for around like 9 million, I thought it was. They sold the water rights for 24 million. They still have the land. And now, you know, because they're letting the land rest and rewild, they can collect carbon credits. You see how the system's working, right? All of this is made possible by these regulations, by overregulation. And the only ones who are benefiting are the big guys. Now, there are a lot of farmers or property owners of farms who are nearing retirement, some are nearing death, okay? This is a big problem in the US and Canada. A lot of this land that's privately owned is privately owned by people who no longer operate farms. They lease their land out, they live on their farms because they enjoyed farming it, they want to continue to see it farming. But what do you think is going to happen when they pass away? Do you think that these people with all of this land, that their kids, their grandchildren, are going to want to continue leasing the land for a minimal fee when they've already moved off to the cities, when they've already moved elsewhere? They're not going to want to. We're about to see over the next decade the largest transition of farmland in North America that we have ever seen. And it is going to be one of the worst things that we've ever seen. Because what's going to happen is a lot of these investment groups that are buying up land for water rights to divert them into cities, to divert them into Facebook warehouses, they're basically going to buy up large tracts of land, and then they're going to get paid in carbon credits to put the land in rest after they've stolen the water rights and stolen its resources. And you'll never get those water rights back. You'll never get those resources back. This isn't the only company that's doing this. And if you look at GIS surveys, if you look at land plats, you'll see that large corporations own many swaths of land across the United States. I have seen some state governments step in and say, you can't own farmland in our state unless you are a direct resident of the state or you are not a corporation. And in fact, there was an issue with Bill Gates buying land as a corporation. I forget what state it was, and it was against the law. You couldn't own land in that state as a corporation, and this is why. Florida is trying to ban the ownership of farmland by China because China's buying up a lot of the land. And what do you think they're going to do? They would probably split up the water rights and everything else and ruin the land just like all the other guys. But I do think, you know, when it comes to agriculture and those lands and people using water to irrigate their crops, if it's done properly, it can help at least mimic the natural hydrology of the area. And I realize that there's going to be a bunch of people who get on here about, well, what about the chemical runoffs and all that stuff? I'm not saying that that's being done right. What I'm saying is that agriculture in many forms and shapes, when done properly, when done organically, can actually have a positive impact on those environments. It could have a positive impact on the hydrology. The other thing I wonder about with all this diversion of watering and you know, when we look at, for example, the Klamath Basin, okay, they just got actually, the Bureau of Reclamation just released water rights for the Klamath project, 35% below what they estimate they need to grow crops. This is an example of an area that was once floodplains, it was once lakes, and basically it was, you know, it has been drained for farming. And what they do is they capture the water runoff with a dam, and then they release it downstream, and they release some back into Klamath to help, you know, grow crops. And what makes it such good cropland is that it used to be floodplains. And because of the watering of the crops, because of the way that the project is run, it has actually helped to maintain a lot of the wildlife and bird corridors up in that area that would have naturally been there from the floodplains. Okay, these were areas that were flooded, they diverted the water, then they allowed some water to go back, and they allowed some water to go downstream. In 2001, they completely cut off the farmers, and because of, you know, endangered fish populations along the river. And what ended up happening the next year was a bunch of the salmon died for other reasons, natural causes. And there are actually reports that say that, you know, cutting off the water to the farmers wasn't scientifically justified. And if you think about it, if you think about the original natural flow of the water, a lot of that water would have gone into the area we now call the Klamath Project. So anyway, since that time, for the last 5 years with drought conditions, the farmers in that area have received far less than what their water rights from the Klamath Project would normally allocate to them. And because of that, what you're starting to see is the smaller farmers dropping out because they can't hang in there. The government's basically said, we're going to give you guys less water from the water that would have naturally been flooding into this area, and we're going to pay you money instead to help offset, you know, the drought conditions. There's not a drought, by the way. The lake is the fullest that it's been in years. They've had really good snowpack. In some of these years, 200% of the snowpack. The water is being diverted in the name of salmon. There's no scientific evidence that supports that claim. But what there is along that project and along the Klamath River as it heads out to the Pacific are a lot of power dams. So you do the math and you tell me what you think is going on. Meanwhile, the diversion of water has hurt Native Americans, it's hurt farmers, it's hurt everybody, the entire community that lives there. And they're most likely going to put a lot of farmers out of business slowly by restraining a lot of this water usage. Like I said, a lot of the areas that you see being crop farmed in these areas along these rivers would have naturally been floodplains. And if you go back and you look at when we had beavers, somebody brought this up because of Custer State Park. Beavers used to build all sorts of dams all over stream beds and you know, all over the United States. We hunted a lot of them out. But what they would have done to the natural hydrology of our soil throughout the United States, where they create flood areas, where it takes longer for that water to perpetrate down into the soil, down into the groundwater. It would have had a massive impact just removing the beavers. Nowadays, we have these dams that we put in there, and then we start selling water rights, we start selling flood water rights, but in doing so, we've also blocked off where those waters would have naturally flooded into the soils downstream. So it's all very interesting. I don't think that enough people pay attention to the natural hydrology and understanding, you know, agricultural practices, and how if agricultural practices are implemented properly for the environment, it could actually be a very good thing. But at the end of the day, these water rights and these water regulations had made an incredible investment opportunity to sell that water to developers, to cities, to government entities. That's who this company works with. They work with governments to buy water off of, say, the Colorado River and sell it. It's truly amazing, and it's worth more than oil, more than gold. I mean, water is a valuable resource out west. But again, it's concerning to see all this happening. A lot of people don't realize where a lot of these water rights issues are out west. Most of the vegetables and fruits in the United States are grown west of the Colorado Rockies, okay? Where you see a lot of this stuff going on. During the drought years, we lost large amounts of almond crops, large amounts of peach crops. We lost asparagus crops, things that take multiple years to develop just to be able to harvest, just completely wiped out because of the loss of water rights. You're seeing it across the United States. You're seeing these battles between farmers and the federal government. There's always an environmental reason behind it, but sneaking in the background, there's always a diversion that's making people millions upon millions of dollars. I don't have all the answers to how you solve that issue, but I am gonna bring awareness to it, and I hope you guys have some comments on it, because this is an important issue, and realistically, we're gonna see this on large scale over the next 10 years. People talk about reclaiming 30% of the farmland in America under a certain agenda. It's going to happen, and the corporations are the ones that are going to do it, and they're gonna do it because of carbon credits, because of being able to sell water rights, They're being able to buy up this farmland because generations are ready to sell, because nobody else is farming that land. The farmers today are primarily leasing land. Okay, they don't own it. And so they're gonna buy up that land, they're gonna scrape out every value they can of it, get rid of the farmer because they won't be able to farm it anymore, and then they're going to turn around and get paid carbon credits on that land. In the meantime, our food sovereignty as a nation is going to suffer.